maybe the traditional view was that we're supposed to be so strong and so resilient, and you don't bring any of the baggage into the workplace, you leave it at home. And I think I've always found, at least, that when I have been vulnerable, especially with someone that may not know me as well, or a new team member, or a more like an earlier career person as well, and I open up, I've consistently heard, wow, I would have never thought that about you. Like, I would have thought you were not nervous to talk in front of people, or I didn't know, this scared you. Like, that's so good to know because it scares me too. So I think it's a way of identifying with people, or at least having them see that you're a real person as well. Especially as, we grow, and friends that we kind of had along the way, you end up having very different perspectives about things. And I'm always just curious, like, help me understand. Like, I always try to ask that question, help me understand your point of view, or help me understand why you see it that way, just so that if I'm struggling, someone's being patient with me, because it could be frustrating if you're trying to explain something and someone doesn't get it. So, really being vulnerable to say, like, I really want to understand, just can you help me along a little bit?
All right, guys, welcome back to a brand new episode of our HR Heroes podcast. I have Christine Coppola with me here today. Christine, thank you so much for joining me. I appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Today's going to be a great conversation. We're going to talk about a lot of stuff: your passion for being athletic, your history in English, your role as an HR leader today at NBCUniversal Media. But before we kind of get into that, one of the things that I want to ask you is kind of a human-centric question. So, Christine, how's your heart doing today?
It's good. It was a long weekend, so I think I had a little bit more time to recharge than I normally do. So feeling really good going into the week.
I love that. What's one of the things that you do to kind of recharge your system, if you will, when you get a long weekend?
So swim. I spent some time in the ocean swimming this week. I'm training for something, so it was mandatory, but I also enjoy it. So that's helpful. And I always feel like I'm able to recharge my batteries in the ocean.
I love that. One of the things I think is so cool, in our previous conversation, we talked about kind of the meditative nature of just being out there in the ocean and swimming by yourself. It's just so cool to kind of think about something as scary as swimming in the ocean is like something that some people do like you to kind of recharge. I personally don't like swimming in deep water. Do you ever get any type of like anxiety or kind of like that fear of like I'm in 360, I would say, degrees of like vulnerability while you're swimming?
Yes. And I think that's actually part of the beauty of it is I'm a controlling sort of person by nature. I like to control things, but you really have to relinquish control when you're in the ocean. You have to certainly be attentive and aware of your surroundings and making sure that you feel safe where you are as much as you could be, but you're also entering a domain that is not your natural habitat. And so there's things there that is their natural habitat. And you just have to be at peace with the fact that you might see some of that as you're swimming.
Have you ever seen a shark while you've been swimming in the ocean?
I have. We have hammerhead, which isn't terribly scary. They're pretty docile for the most part. So there's a few that keep company in the area I swim, and lots of huge tarpon fish and rays, which are gorgeous when they're swimming below you. They're just so beautiful. And manatees, there's a whole lot of wildlife there.
Oh man, what a beautiful place to be able to just kind of experience nature in its full, I would say, encompassing nature, which is so cool. So as we kind of get moving into our episode here today, I want to pose a question that came from our previous guest. Now, this is a question that came from Chanel. Now, she works as an HR leader, and she wants to know, what is the most rewarding part of working in human resources?
I think for me, it's helping people realize things that they don't realize are within them. So somehow being able to extract a skill that they didn't even know was inside them, or a resilience, and helping them sort of guide them to their next step, especially when someone's in a rut or struggling and you help them through something difficult. I think that's probably one of the most rewarding things that keeps me going.
And why do you kind of say that? Because one of the things that I was, thinking about in your answer, because you mentioned that in our previous conversation of that's part of your job that you love is helping people see different perspectives. Why do you feel like from a leadership perspective, it's so important to help people kind of see things from a different angle, if you will, especially when they're kind of like at a roadblock or stuck in a moment?
Yes, I think whether it be in the workplace or outside of the workplace, I think when people can become entrenched, it's not great. It's not great for sort of either side or any of the dynamics at play. So to be able to help someone sort of just see that, it doesn't maybe change the way you feel, but there could be a different perspective or a different vantage point or a different angle that you could look at this at. I mean, it's helpful for me to sort of practice what I preach, but then also help people do it as well, so that we can foster sort of better, more collaborative relationships in work and also out of work as well.
I feel like that kind of comes down to the skill set of like curiosity, if you will, because when we come to a roadblock or even a crossroads, often it's easy to think, me being somebody who often likes a plan, often I feel like if something's not going by the plan or by how we kind of mapped it out, it seems a little bit chaotic. But one thing I've been trying to work on as I get a little bit older is that sense of curiosity to kind of take a step back and say, what other ways can we accomplish this? So how do you kind of think curiosity has kind of played into your overall life as, I would say, a trait of your own and kind of looking at situations differently?
Yeah, I think, we inherently sort of end up inheriting a lot of what we believe, and, what we see growing up, what we hear, all of those things sort of shape the way we are. And then I think as adults, it's hard to shift away from that sometimes. And one of the things I always say, especially if I feel myself having a conversation and, that feeling inside you, you're kind of becoming defensive, or, anxiety or something. I always ask myself, like, but what if you're wrong? What if what you feel or what you believe, what if it's totally wrong? And there's a different way, or at least somewhere in between. So I ask myself that question sometimes, just to kind of shift out of that mode of defensive-ness.
Man, when I think about that, I think about how scary it can be to be vulnerable, to even challenge ourselves to say, am I wrong in this scenario? Have you ever tried to kind of hone that skill set of being vulnerable to ask if you're wrong in the situation? Like, have you have any life experiences where that's kind of like paid off for you, or you've had to kind of have that different approach and mindset?
I think I've done it probably both in the workplace and outside, especially as, we grow, and friends that we kind of had along the way, you end up having very different perspectives about things. And I'm always just curious, like, help me understand. Like, I always try to ask that question, help me understand your point of view, or help me understand why you see it that way, just so that if I'm struggling, someone's being patient with me, because it could be frustrating if you're trying to explain something and someone doesn't get it. So, really being vulnerable to say, like, I really want to understand, just can you help me along a little bit?
Yeah. Do you think vulnerability from a leadership perspective is a weakness? Or do you think that's changed over time? Because I was having a conversation with another HR leader, Crystal January Craft, and she talked about, because she came up in a certain sector of business, she always thought that vulnerability early in her career was a sign of weakness, which I thought was really interesting. But as she's gotten older, she realized that vulnerability is kind of one of her superpowers, and it helps her connect with her team more. So why do you think vulnerability, especially over the years, has been looked at as kind of like a weakness, especially in like leadership positions?
I think we're always supposed, maybe the traditional view was that we're supposed to be so strong and so resilient, and, you don't bring any of the baggage into the workplace, you leave it at home. And I think I've always found, at least, that when I have been vulnerable, especially with someone that may not know me as well, or a new team member, or a more like an earlier career person as well, and I open up, I've consistently heard, wow, I would have never thought that about you. Like, I would have thought you were not nervous to talk in front of people, or I didn't know, this scared you. Like, that's so good to know, because it scares me too. So I think it's a way of identifying with people, or at least having them see that you're a real person as well.
And I feel like that's part of something that is expected in today's landscape of work, if you will. Because a lot on the podcast, we talk about kind of the blend, if you will, from our personal lives into our professional lives. And it seems like, especially since the pandemic, those two worlds have become incredibly blurry or integrated, if you will. And so do you feel like we expect in our personal lives for people to be vulnerable so we can connect with them, and now that's translating into kind of the workspace or our expectation of work these days?
I think it's, looking up to, I think it's really people as they look up to someone that they want to not necessarily follow, but like someone who, as their leader, I think that what they want them to embody as characteristics has definitely shifted. And they do want someone that can lead them through difficult things, can guide them when maybe not everybody has the answers, or help see around the corner, but also someone that has real problems, that, it's not some perfect life and I'm able to kind of come to work and everything's great, and that's why I'm able to kind of lead. It's like I'm kind of making all that stuff work and solving problems in my own life, and it's not always clean. It's sometimes very messy, and I think it helps people just make them feel better about their situation as well.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. It's just so interesting how the dynamic of leadership has changed over the years because I grew up looking at people like Steve Jobs as an example. It seemed like these guys were world beaters. They were titans. They were undeniably amazing. But it seems like in today's world, we're looking for more of the human touch, if you will, in all the elements of life. And I'm not sure if that was because of the pandemic or it was something that was happening much before it, but it seems like today's working generation is just looking for a little bit more human connection. I want to kind of double click on what you said about the perfect, like mask, if you will. Do you feel like social media over the last years has kind of trained us to put out a perfect version of ourselves? And now we're kind of at an inflection point in society where people are looking for more authenticity because it seems like the people who are the most authentic get the most visibility and reach on social media platforms. But it seems like a lot of people are still trying to say, I'm always happy, or I'm on vacation, or here's my new experience, or I just got promoted, when it's always not that way, if that makes sense.
Right. I think they're probably filtering out like a lot of what, and maybe it's not intentional sometimes. Maybe it's just like I have to kind of do this because I don't, people don't want to see negative or I don't want to put negative out there. And so they sort of filter it. So I think sometimes it's just innocent. Other times it's like, this was the best picture and this is the most, the best filter I could use and things like that. But I'm always attracted and always sort of click in on when I see someone just putting themselves out there and being vulnerable and telling a side of themselves that you may not know. It just is amazing, especially when it's someone who, you first get to know them out there as, let's just say, an athlete or someone who you think has it all together. And then you see that they're struggling with the same things you are. I think that's just highly relatable.
Do you mind if I ask you a personal question?
Sure.
Because I feel like this is an awesome opportunity. What's something that we might not know about you? Because if we look at you from the outside looking in on your LinkedIn profile, you've got a substantial position at NBC Universal, and it seems like you're absolutely killing it. You went to Yale, but like, what is something that we don't know about Christine that maybe would be interesting to kind of give everybody a little understanding of who you truly are?
I would say probably the most difficult life. It's probably a, a topic for another podcast, but I struggled so bad. But like at the end of college and also, graduating those first few years, I really struggled with a lot, like finding out like who am I? What do I want to do? I think I had this expectation of kind of what would happen and how things would work, and it didn't. And I really set myself up for disappointment. And it took me some time to kind of dig out of that, definitely hitting rock bottom and crawling out. But I also think as I look back, I wouldn't want it any other way because all of the struggles that I've had along the way just kind of have made me who I am today. And I wouldn't change it if I could go back either.
Yeah. Do we mind if we kind of dive a little bit deeper into that? What was some of the expectations that maybe you had that were going to happen that maybe didn't, that kind of put you in a position where you had to kind of like show the resiliency, if you will, and how you're going to figure stuff out?
Yeah, I think I thought for some reason, I think because I was one of the first people in my family to go to college, that I would graduate and somehow like this map, this like red carpet is rolled out and you fall into like your dream job without even really knowing what I truly wanted to do. And I know that there's a lot of resources now for people to kind of try and figure that out. And, they have parents' guidance and counselor's guidance. And I either didn't tap into that the right way or I just didn't have it and I can't remember. But I think wherever you kind of have that difference in what your expectations are, like if it's really wide too, I think those are the times where you kind of struggle in life and can fall into a big rut. And that's what I did.
I mean, I have a constant conversation with some of my friends because I find myself in the same position where you do. First person to go to college. I have huge expectations for what I want to accomplish for my family. My girlfriend right now is going to medical school, and we often talk about it sucks sometimes because it seems like we can't lean on our family or the resources around us because they've never been where we're trying to get to. And so it's like I'm asking somebody for an opinion about how I should navigate this challenge, but they have no context on having to ever come across these challenges or overcome some of these hurdles. And does it seem like you could kind of relate with that as well? Being the first person, you didn't really have the support system to be like, hey, how should I navigate this challenge?
That's right. I think they didn't have those sort of experiences either, so no idea how to really guide me as well. So, I mean, I'm sure that my son will look at me and think, he'll probably have different experiences than me, but what I just try to, he's only 6, but I try to communicate as much as I can about, hey, you can try as many things as you want because you need to figure out what you love to do and what you're good at. You don't know until you do it. And my dad did that with me a bit with sports, but in terms of anything outside of sports, I was a little bit kind of lost. And so I have him try different things and, not just sports, but other things as well. And hopefully something clicks with him and I can guide him the best I can, or at least direct him to the resources that are out there.
Yeah, I mean, because we never know what we truly love until we taste it. And that's one of the things that I worry about when a lot of people go down the traditional path of the education. We are 17, 18 years old when we get into college, and people say, pick a path for the rest of your career, which is your life. But just 1 month ago, they were having to raise their hand to go to the bathroom. And it seems like there's a lot of responsibility put on these kids today to kind of choose their path. And I'm so proud of this new generation who seems to kind of be trying more things with the side hustles and everything else that they're doing to get exposure to stuff that they really love. One of the things that I know that you really love is reading, but that came at an early experience of you kind of falling in love with English. So why don't we kind of talk about your passion for English and reading and everything else that kind of comes along with that?
Sure. So I always loved to read, and I started reading early, but never really considered it like a strength per se or something I'd want to dig into deeper. But I did have a teacher when I was in high school, so it took kind of a while, who really leaned in and said, you're really great at sort of reading stuff, but extracting like the themes, like what the writer was trying to say and what's sort of written between the lines, some of those sort of the untold, like the things that aren't spelled out, basically. And she was great because she gave us a lot of exposure to, I mean, I think we started with like very early, like a Beowulf, and then like kind of worked our way up to modern reading. And then she had this focus on African American literature, which I really loved when I was reading. Like Richard Wright is one of my favorite authors, and she just sparked something in me that said, like, I just love this. Like, how do I do more of this? And I decided to major in English in college.
Wow. So English in college, but then you find yourself in some professional opportunities that kind of pushed you in the direction of HR. So I know that you spent some time working in various roles at Arthur Andersen. So why don't we kind of talk about some of those early experiences and how that kind of pushed you down the path to being an HR hero?
Sure. So when I started working, like I said before, I was a little lost. I wasn't exactly sure, didn't have a good sense of maybe what my skills and development areas were and like how that might play out into a career. I was lucky enough to land a role, and it was sort of a floater role back then at Arthur Andersen. And so I got to work on marketing projects. I got to work in human resources. I got to work in tax and all different areas, meet a lot of people, which was great. And I went into that thinking like, oh, marketing's really cool. But when I started doing it, I wasn't really good at it and I didn't actually like it. But I really loved the HR projects I worked on. And I thought, geez, this was not even like remotely on my radar when I was not at all. But this is really cool. Like, how do I start a career in HR? And that's kind of how it was born.
What were some of those early experiences that you had in HR that kind of like said, this is really something I could kind of lean into?
Yeah, one of the projects, I mean, it's going to sound crazy because it was so long ago, but one of the projects we were working on at Arthur Andersen's, it was almost like an internal Facebook. So like, if there was a lot of, global travel. And so like one easy place where someone could type in an employee's name, oh, I'm going to meet with, someone in London. Let me see like what they look like and where they sit and kind of get like the lay of the land before I go there. That was what it was intended for. And, this was before Facebook, but it was kind of one of those things. And I just thought, how do you, connecting people like that all became very interesting to me. And I started out as an HR assistant when I finally landed a role. And it was great because I got exposure to like so many different facets of HR and really to figure out like, do I go into sort of compensation planning or talent acquisition or an HR generalist field? And it was a great way to just learn a lot about HR.
Why do you feel like so many people don't know that HR is even a thing, especially when they go through their academic career and then find themselves in an organization where they get exposure natively to kind of the HR functions and connecting people? Because this is a common story that I often hear from a lot of different leaders. It's like, I went into school for business and development, and then I came into a situation where I experienced HR and I was like, hey, what is this? This is something completely different from anything I've ever exposed or been exposed to.
Yeah, it certainly hasn't been on like the traditional list of, if you ask your parents, like, well, at least my parents, what can I be when I grow up? It was like a lawyer, a doctor, a teacher, and it's not on the list. It's not on the short list. I don't think, or it wasn't traditionally. And also, I think when I was early career, at least HR was not in the same sort of light, I think, as it is now. It's very much a back office function, processing payroll, keeping employee personnel files, like things like that. And it's evolved. So I think now you didn't even know you didn't have an HR person. I think when I first started working, they were just like something over there that like got you hired and you got paid and everything worked and you were happy. But now it's very different. And so I think there's a little bit more awareness about it as a career as well.
Yeah, why do you think the importance of HR is something that so many organizations are focusing on today? Because I even see the language changing across the landscape from being HR to being like people and culture, which seems a lot more humanistic. Why do you think we've seen the evolution of, I would say, HR being something more of a forward-facing individual or team inside of an organization, and why that's so important?
I think some of the, like you said, connecting the dots with the human aspect of work. Everyone comes with, traditionally a lot of tangible. I'm a tax person, I'm a treasurer, I'm finance, and I'm accounting. But who's sort of connecting the dots between everyone? When teams sort of need to work closer together, how do we build a culture where people actually want to come to work every day? I think those things have become much more important, I think, than even rewinding, 15 years ago. It was just not something that was at the forefront for a lot of places.
Yeah, I mean, there's a dynamic change, and I feel like a lot of our conversation today is kind of about the changing nature of life and business in general. There was a story that you told me about kind of your early experiences at an organization that a lot of people have heard about called Enron. And one thing that stuck out to me, you said nothing is too big to not be here tomorrow. And so there's an importance of a plan B. So let's talk about kind of your early Enron experience, because I know that that's something that's a lot of people who are listening and watching the podcast have experienced. I want to hear kind of like your insight into like kind of the interior, if you will, of that experience that you had in your professional career.
Yeah. So when I was finally sort of digging myself out of that rut that I mentioned, and I landed this role at Arthur Andersen, things were clicking. I was figuring out that, okay, HR is probably a career that I want to pursue further. And things were going phenomenally. I was on a great track. I felt like I had a career path there and that I was going to have opportunity. And it was this huge global company. I was working on this project to connect people all over the world, people, traveling to Italy to meet, different colleagues. And just, I was like, wow, this is amazing. This is exactly where I want to be, this global powerhouse, big five company. And of course, then the Enron, I was a year into my role at Arthur Andersen. The Enron news starts unfolding. And I'm thinking to myself, early 20-year-old self, like, wow, well, like we'll be fine, so maybe we'll have a lawsuit and get some fines and we've got to like shed some businesses, but we'll still be here tomorrow. And then I saw office furniture being liquidated and helping that process, waves of huge layoffs. I was one of the last people to go because I was helping with that liquidation and a lot of the administrative things. And I still didn't think, I don't think until the HR person told me, your last day is today. I couldn't believe I was hearing those words. And so I don't know what I was thinking at the time. Like, how was I going to survive this? Like, how is anybody going to survive it? But that's what I was thinking until I was actually laid off. I didn't believe it was happening. So it was a great life lesson. It was very painful because I loved what I was doing. I loved who I was doing it with. But it was a great reminder that no matter where you are, like it could possibly not be here tomorrow.
I mean, that's a scary experience, being in your young 20s and being a part of what I would say is kind of like the behemoth, like you said, big five organization, then watching it kind of disappear overnight. What were some of the conversations that maybe you were having with some of your peers at the time about like the changes that were going to happen, the uncertainty for the future? I really want to kind of tap into that younger mindset and kind of how you navigated that element.
Yeah, so I was really junior compared to a lot of people I worked with. I don't think there was really anyone at the time, especially in my core group of people that I worked with, that was anywhere near my age. Everyone was much more senior, and I think none of us really believed that that was going to happen. And maybe it was something that was like farther out even. So we were just like almost talking about how do we bounce back from this, and timing should be very far out and we'll have all this time. But it happened relatively quickly, actually, from when the news came out to when the last person was out of the office I was working in. I think it was like October to May. So for such a
Wow.
huge company to start like shutting down offices, it was kind of unfolding quicker than I think we were ready to comprehend, for sure. And I was only there a year, like I said. So I had 2 weeks severance, and I was definitely living paycheck to paycheck back then. And so for me, it was like, where am I going to land? And that became, I quickly had to shift to like, this is happening to, okay, what's next? And how do I pick myself up and find the next job so I can actually pay my bills?
Yeah, I mean, what was kind of that experience like of saying like I've got to pivot quickly. I've got 2 weeks severance now. Like I'm young 20s, I'm living paycheck to paycheck because I feel like this is a common conversation that comes up in the mindset of younger workforce today because there's a lot of like psychological unsafety or not there's a lack of psychological safety because of all of us growing up and seeing experiences like Enron or like Amazon or all these other companies who just like cut huge forces of their workforce. So what was kind of the experience like in you trying to get your feet underneath you and then saying, all right, I've got to kind of make something happen over the next couple months, or what was that like for you?
Yeah, so it became, that whole, oh, I just found out that I love HR and this is my career and things were clicking into place. It became, I had to really switch gears and almost like put that to the side. The market was pretty flooded at the time with people looking for jobs. I mean, our office was big and a lot of people got laid off, and a lot of, people were looking for similar roles. And so I found myself having to just take a job that I could pay, I could kind of keep myself, sustaining. And it was another assistant job. And so it wasn't exactly what I wanted to do, but everything's a great experience. And I got to meet great people and, again, try to do as much as I can to lean into how do I get myself HR experience so that when I'm ready to kind of look again, or when I can start looking for like that, career job, I'm best positioned to have the skill set that I need in order to break into that field.
One of the things that we have as a company value is ultimate accountability. Now, ultimate accountability from our perspective comes and it starts with ourselves to take accountability to our situation and do what's necessary to move forward, but also being accountable towards our team members as well. And I know in our previous conversation, you kind of lit up when we talked about the topic of accountability. So in today's world, it seems like we've lost the way, if you will, to kind of look at accountability being so important for us kind of navigating our own path in life. What's kind of your 2 cents on accountability and maybe why so many people have a tough time being grounded in that ultimate sense of accountability for ourselves and for the people around us?
Yes, I love to hear that. I firmly believe that, whatever happens, regardless of what you may initially feel or the cycle of emotions that you might filter through, it's up to you and only you to sort of pick yourself up. Like I could look, oh my God, Enron, it was so terrible. It was someone else's fault. Like here I am, I don't have a job. No, like I have to figure out what is the next step and how do I do it. And I may have to push my dream of, getting into HR off to the side for a minute because I need to, like my priority was securing employment so that I can pay my bills and move forward. And it wasn't the worst scenario ever either. It was it was a good job at a good company, but it wasn't exactly what I wanted, and I didn't wallow in it. I just started to pick up the pieces and move on, and then eventually was able to kind of get that grounding where I could start to focus again and think about, okay, HR is sort of the plan. So how do I kind of get there? Where are the gaps that I need to fill in order to be able to break into that as a career?
Why do we feel like so many people struggle with accountability today?
I think it's easy to turn the focus outward. I really do. I think it's easy to point at something and say it's because of this, or because of this person, or because they feel this way, or because of this, that, or the other thing, and all unfair. This is unfair. But I think at the end of the day, you really have to look inward. And even though there are many things that are unfair and not exactly going to work out the way that we want them to, it's up to you to find that sort of peace to be able to move on with your life.
One of the things that I feel like is a common conversation that we hear a lot about, especially in the world of business, is AI. Now, November 2022, ChatGPT is released. People start having their famous human reaction of either this is going to be great or this is going to be terrible and steal all of our jobs. I was listening to a podcast yesterday with the CEO of NVIDIA who was talking about if you are not actively engaging with and exploring AI, then you are going to be left behind. Because let's be clear, AI is not going to steal your job, but someone who knows how to use AI will be able to come along and take your job from you without you even knowing what's going on. So how do you kind of think about, we'll kind of intertwine here the idea of accountability to explore new technology like AI and how it can be effective kind of in our personal lives and our professional lives as we kind of move towards the future of this like technological evolution that's kind of happening around us?
Yes, I think like anything else that comes along, if you dismiss it, you at least have to have the curiosity. to start to kind of figure out how this plays in. And it may not be crystal clear how it's going to change your life or your job, but you at least have to explore, be curious, see how you can sort of toy with it, even if it's not directly related to your job. How can you explore it, use it, just to kind of understand how it works? What are the pros and cons? It's like very helpful to understand that, I think. I mean, if people rejected sort of the assembly line technology back in the day, they would have been out of a job. Or if you totally dismissed the internet, I think you probably wouldn't have been best set up back when that came out either. So I get this, it's the same. It's also important to ask the question, how do I make sure that I'm continuing to build my skill set so that I'm differentiated? Maybe what I do, maybe a part of what I do today will be replaced by AI or some technology, but what are the things that will be much harder to be replaced? Or how does this job change in the future? And how do I get the skill set? How do I close the skill gap to make myself as best positioned as possible for the future?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite conversations was one of my recent podcast episodes, and we were talking about kind of the shelf life of skill sets. And when you come through a university, the individual who I was talking to said that your skill set has a shelf life coming out of higher ed of about 2.5 years, meaning technology and skills are moving so quickly that what you learned inside the classroom is going to be applicable for the next 2.5 years. But now we have tools like AI, and it seems like that time has even been shrunk down. So what do you think about kind of the ongoing necessity to build skill sets for ourselves personally so we can become more valuable, and why that's so important?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially as I find, at this juncture in my career, like trying to think about what's next. So what's after AI? So like there's AI, and like what corner are we not able to see around that's coming? That's really I think none of us expected that COVID was coming. I think we're always thinking, and the last sort of big thing that happened while I was in my career was September 11th. Like you're thinking maybe something like that's going to happen. Then no, wait, it's COVID. And so what else could happen? Besides AI, or besides like things that kind of shift us as a society that we're not seeing, that we need to think about as well. So just taking time to really think, like, what are we not seeing? I mean, we're always hearing a lot about AI, but what else could be there that might send us for a little bit of a spin?
I mean, let's be real. It seemed like we lived in a really thin layer of silver lining in our lives being great. And it seemed like on a Wednesday, we all experienced kind of the world shutting down. And that really had a huge impact on kind of how I viewed the world and how I need to be ready for these situations. And it almost kind of brings up the word of like complacency in my mind. When we think about how we need to be ready and nimble, if you stay ready, you don't have to get ready, which is one of my favorite sayings.
Yeah.
What do you kind of think about from the AI perspective? How do you think it's going to impact the role of HR? Because I have a lot of these conversations today, and people often talk about talent acquisition or, automation of functions and that kind of stuff. And naturally from HR, it seems a little threatening. But what do you kind of think the future impact of AI is going to be on the space specifically?
I think in some ways I'm pretty positive about it. I think in some ways I feel like it'll take away, or at least help with, some of the things that we don't enjoy doing as much anymore. And so maybe some of that, screening in a certain, whether it be talent acquisition or a different, like data sort of, no matter where I worked, no matter how sophisticated the company, I always felt like we were still clunky with data. So I think where those gaps are filled by AI, I think that's a good thing. I think some of the other things it can't replace, although I could be wrong and I'm not an expert, is those human to human sort of connections that, you just can't dump your emotions in a bot and have it spit out the answer. Sometimes you just need to noodle over things with someone that might have had a similar experience, or know someone that had a similar experience and can help you kind of guide you through that, or at least find a connection for you. That's a great resource. I think some of those things are a little trickier. They could get there eventually, but I don't think we're there yet.
No, I totally agree. And I love the way that you phrase that, because when I think about human resources, I like to think about the human touch that is so important in business and building relationships and connection. And if we can kind of take all the stuff off of our plate of having to answer questions about PTO, FMLA, all these other benefits that often tie our teams up by having to send back emails and answer phone calls, maybe we can put ourselves in more humanistic positions to be accelerators of the organization rather than being caught up on the mundane stuff. It seems like AI in itself plays a perfect yin to the HR yang, if that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely. Well said.
How do you think about, one of the things I always think about is kind of technology in itself needs to be an accelerator, not a replacement. And I feel like in our world today, it's so easy for us to either say it's either red or blue when the answer really is kind of like a purple mix, if that makes sense to you. Why do you feel like it's so important to have that kind of that and mentality instead of or, if that makes sense?
I agree with you. Instead of like a complete supplementation, replacement, I think using it to sort of help, like you said, it frees up time to do the more human value added things, whatever that is, whether it's an HR or a different function or a different role completely. I would think that supplementation would help sort of free up so that you can do value added work.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree more. And it's just an interesting inflection point because me and my team, because we have a lot of these HR conversations, one of the things that we've been doing is working with some of our large healthcare systems and our larger organizations. And what we did is we built something called conversational AI that has the ability to answer questions about employee handbooks or employee data sets and stuff like that. And it's been crazy to kind of see the reaction of our HR leaders when we bring a solution to the table for them because they're like, I don't have to answer all those redundant questions. I can now be in the best position to support my team. And look how much time has been freed up. And it's so interesting to kind of think about how technology has the way to kind of be a flashlight to illuminate the future instead of kind of a threat that so many people look at, which I feel like is so interesting to me.
Yes,
Yeah, it's just really, it's a crazy time.
it is cool and interesting. And it'll be cool to see kind of where things unfold. I know there is a darker side as there is to everything. I think there was an article I read yesterday about kind of faces being like, on social media, you post pictures. There was one at a prom and someone had sort of used technology and taken the face off a person and put it on sort of a nude body and disseminated it. Like that kind of stuff is what we need to kind of have an eye out for. But I think replacing a job, the fear of replacing my job or your job or whatever, I think you have to be just shifting a little bit to think about, well, what am I going to do to keep myself current and make sure that I'm still valuable in the future?
Yeah, I know in our previous conversation, we talked a little bit about kind of Gen Z and their natural ability or need to develop the skill set of challenging information that they see. And that got triggered in my head when you were talking about a prom picture. Someone takes their face, puts it on a different body, and disseminates it. Why do you feel like we're kind of at the position where people feel like that kind of stuff is necessary? What is like the underlying motivation of someone to do that and then to send out an image? I don't know if it was about themselves or if it was about somebody else. Why do you feel like we're kind of getting into that world of inauthenticity, if that makes sense? Why do you think we're there?
I think, even though I find it unimaginable because I wouldn't have the time or desire to do this, distraction. I think distraction and confusion is sort of the main goal of people doing those kinds of things.
What does that mean, distraction? Because that's something that I really want to dive into, and you kind of perfectly segued into what my next topic of discussion was going to be.
I think distracting people from what they should be. It's an easily distractible society that we live in. People are becoming more and more. Attention is something that is really hard to garner. And I think, if we're busy sort of tracking down, okay, who did this with my stuff and who actually hacked into my Instagram and what are they doing with it? We're not doing what we should be doing, which is like living our life and being present for people. And it's a distraction. I think, especially with the data stuff that we see out there, the misinformation and just a distraction from what we really should be doing and focused on.
I mean, I couldn't agree more. And I always talk about this in my personal circle. It seems like today's generation, no matter what age you are, talking about this digital generation, we all deal with distraction more so than anybody else or any previous generation did. And it seems like it's so easy when we think about the contrast of building the life that you really want, having the relationships that you really want, those take focus and they take time. But it seems like the world that we live in is constantly kind of picking at our attention and distracting us and pulling us so many different directions. And it seems like that's why it's so easy for people to complain and moan about why they don't have what they want. But then if you look at the time that you're spending, often you're spending 6, 7 hours a day on your phone. Do you know what I mean? And that isn't you being present and actually engaging in this real world. It's such an interesting time to kind of think about the element of distraction and how capable it is at taking us away from what we really want in life.
It really is. It's something that I'm not going to lie. I'll be very honest. I struggle with it as well. So I'm going to sit down to read a book, but then I'll like check my phone because I see that there's notifications, and then you end up going in all kinds of places that you didn't intend to go. And so for me, I've had to make an earnest effort to not pick it up certain times, not constantly look at it, and just carve out time for, okay, like I want to make sure my mom isn't texting me because there's something wrong, but I also don't then want to digress and start like scrolling on Instagram at random things, because it's, what am I accomplishing? So I've really kind of tried to work on that, especially the last like 2 years, and like dedicate time, almost like segment my time a little bit and compartmentalize. It's like when I'm working, I'm working. When I'm reading, I'm reading. And of course, there may be things like my child who needs something and it distracts me and I'm not able to finish the book that I wanted or something like that. But that's a distraction. I think that's a good one. I think the digital distraction is one that's kind of very difficult and you have to really keep an eye on.
So here's a trick. Do you have an iPhone or do you have an Android phone?
I have an iPhone. Two.
Okay. So one thing that you can do is you can actually go into your iPhone settings, go to accessibility, and then go to color filters and turn on grayscale. So your phone will be blacks and whites. There'll be no vibrant blues, yellows, reds that kind of gain our attention. And this is one of the tricks that I've been using recently, because you can reduce your screen time by 30% a day just by having it be in grayscale, which is crazy.
I didn't even
Another
know.
Yeah, it's a really cool tool. Another interesting thing that you can do is if you track your screen time. This is for everybody who's listening and watching. If you track your screen time, you can go in, swipe left on your phone or right on your phone, whatever it looks like, pulls up your screen time calculator. And if you look at that number, you can go to a website called Lifetime Screen Time Calculator, and you can enter in your age and enter in the average amount of time you spend on your phone, and it extrapolates how much time you're going to spend on your device for the rest of your life. And if you ever want a sobering experience, go on there and check it out. I use this as an example on a LinkedIn post one time. The average 18-year-old today spends about 9 hours of time on their device, meaning when they wake up, 9 hours throughout their day, they're looking at their device. If you extrapolate that out for the rest of their life, how much time do you think these individuals will spend on their phone? Just guess.
Wild. I can't even imagine. I can't guess. Just
25 years.
Oh my gosh, that's scary.
25 years of your life is spent looking at this little device. And so it's like we have to have those sobering moments in order to kind of get us refocused on what our future is going to look like. Because like you said, distraction is an element that so many people deal with today.
Yes.
So as we kind of talk about the future, I want to use the last couple of minutes here to talk about what the future of HR looks like from your perspective. What things are you excited about? What type of pitfalls do you think we need to avoid? What type of technologies do you think are going to pop up? What's kind of your 2 cents about, let's say, the next 5 years?
So I am excited, as we talked about AI, to see how, I know there's, a lot of back and forth right now about how we protect people and protect data and all that. So it'll be interesting to see where it sort of shakes out and then becomes useful for an organization. I think, there's a lot that, even though people feel very vulnerable about losing their job or them becoming maybe redundant because of AI, I think when they could really see, all the stuff you actually complain about might be the stuff that ends up being software. The stuff that you really enjoy doing, you might get to spend more time on. So I think the more we can kind of show that as we're using it more, the better off we'll be. I do think HR, I think I mentioned it, like with COVID, it became such an important role to the organization. And like at least our team, we were helping people go out and, stay connected and get our work done, even though we were not together, but then also getting teams that needed to be here back really quickly. That's just the COVID example, but I think there'll be lots of more sort of examples like that where we all have to kind of really work closely with the business to make sure that we keep things running while there's some other sort of emergency going on.
No, I totally agree. I think it's the HR heroes, and this is why I love hosting the podcast, is to give an understanding of the mindset of our people-centric leaders as we kind of navigate the new future of work. Because the expectation of work has completely changed. Before the pandemic, but long before it, people were living to work. Now we're working to live, and people are using it as a vehicle to go experience life. But that experience expectation comes with completely different, I would say, standards of what we're looking for and how we can be supported. So I'm so glad that we have people like you who are out there thinking about what the future looks like and really basing it back down to those human elements of connection, because those are the things that are going to be so important for the future of work. And I'm so excited that we have leaders like you out there who are fighting the good fight, if that makes sense.
Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Yeah. So I just want to give you the last couple seconds because we want to tie our episodes together. I want you to pose a question for our next HR hero. So what do you got for us, Christine?
Sure. So the question I wanted to ask was, HR professionals spend so much energy guiding others, investing in others. How do you recharge and how do you invest in yourself?
I love that. That's a beautiful place for us to be able to end our conversation today. Once again, Christine, thank you so much for being an HR hero. And thank you so much for having such an awesome conversation with me today and learning about your passion for swimming in the deep, dark ocean, which is something that I need to be brave enough to do. But also, your passion for English, the things that you've done early in your career, talking about your mindset and being capable to navigate your path, even though it might be uncertain. I know there's a lot of people who are going through those experiences and can relate with that experience as well. And I just want to say thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an absolute blast.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much.